Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to take you on the emotional journey of a horrendous murder in a small town called Jefferson, Texas. Before we start, I just want to acknowledge that all of this information was extracted from the book titled Murder of Jefferson, the 1868 Stockade Case by Andrew Spencer and Curtis Hawthorne. Jefferson was founded in 1841 on Big Cypress Bayou by two men who journeyed to the area by an Indian trail that is now known as Trammell's Trace. These two men are known as Allen Urquhart and Daniel Alley. The landscaping of Jefferson is distinguished by Urquhart streets being parallel to Allen streets. Alley invested in land that would become the residential section of a booming metropolis. This story starts in 1868, during the Reconstruction era, and it all began with Albert Browning. The murder of Albert Browning set off a chain of events. Albert was an innocent African-American Jefferson citizen who on August 21, 1868, was abducted from his bed while his wife and children were fast asleep. He was tied up after being robbed of his money, his clothes, his gun, and his horse. He was then dragged out of his house and shot 5 times. This horrible murder was executed by the Knights of the Rising Sun. I'm going to take a second to introduce Richard Philip Crump. By 1860, Crump lived in Jefferson where he worked as a grocer, but he was also a lieutenant who fought in many battles. After the war, Crump returned to Jefferson and became a sheriff. He had the reputation of being opposed to Reconstruction, which led him to become the leader of the Knights of the Rising Sun. The Knights of the Rising Sun was a group created in May of 1868 by the citizens of Jefferson. It was initially organized to serve as a sort of volunteer police force. This group was later identified as a Ku Klux Klan group due to its violent hate crimes towards African Americans. This KKK group plays a significant role in this story. Throughout the story, you might hear me refer to the Knights of the Rising Sun as KRS. The Union Baptist Church was one of the very first black churches in Texas. William Perry, who played a significant role in the history of Jefferson, had given a portion of his land to slaves for worship ground in 1847. The first Union Church was then built for a place for religious services and political meetings. The church was very sacred to African Americans during this time period. After the murder of Albert Browning, the Knights of the Rising Sun rushed to the Union Baptist Church and proceeded with their violent doings. They tied up their horses and made an attempt to break down the door of the black church. What they didn't know is that the people of that church, who were freedmen, were standing there, armed, protecting their church. As the KRS were trying to break in, the freedmen fired shots, which resulted in the KRS hurriedly fleeing. They were in such a hurry that they dropped Browning's weapon that they had just stolen and also left the horse that was stolen tied to the pole of the church. The freedmen protected their church every night since the civil authorities at the time failed to do so. George Webster Smith was a former Union soldier. He is the main character of this story. After the Civil War, Smith became a politician and became known as a passionate Republican and was very active in local Reconstruction efforts. Due to events like the attempted church raid, Smith and the KRS found themselves on opposing sides. Smith was chosen to go to the Constitutional Convention of 1868 through 1869, along with 2 other men from the area, Caldwell and Grigsby. Before Smith left for Austin for the convention, he was warned not to come back to Jefferson or he would be killed. Smith was not fearful and proceeded with his initial plans. When Grigsby arrived back to Jefferson, he was in possession of Smith's carpetbag. If you don't know what a carpetbag is, according to Google Dictionary, a carpetbag is a traveling bag of a kind originally made of the thick woven fabric used for carpets. Continuing on with the story, Grigsby gave Smith's carpetbag to some black civilians and instructed them to take it to Smith. While they were in the process of delivering the carpetbag, they were approached by a group who then stole it. Smith's carpetbag held bonds and notes listing the citizens that owed him money and his property sales in about $1,000 in cash. This was all revealed on October 3rd in a conservative paper called Ultra Ku Klux. Smith and a group of soldiers went looking for the carpetbag but failed to locate it. These soldiers were led by Lieutenant Ryan. Smith was told that a man named Dick Figures was in possession of his carpetbag. Smith wanted to search Figures' house and hoped to locate some of the contents of his bag, but Lieutenant Ryan refused. The Jefferson Times reported Smith returned to town and formed a squad of Negroes to go with him and carry out his original design. Figures received word that there were plans for his house to be searched and then requested that members of the KRS, which he was a member of, would provide him with a guard, which consisted of Colonel Crump and a few other members of the KRS. This next altercation is a vital part of this story. As the KRS guard was finishing up the shift at Figures' house, they claimed to see two black men running across the street. This concerned the KRS, so Crump instructed Harrison Thurman and Tobe Spence to follow the black men. Crump's plan was for him and Spire Haggerty to approach from one side, while Spence and Thurman would approach from the opposite side. Thurman then saw Figures standing between Grant's grocery and Figures' house. Spencer instructed the figure to halt, but the figure then allegedly fired at the guard group. The gunfire struck Thurman through the thigh. Haggerty and one of his guard horses were also wounded. The figure was a part of the group of soldiers that was with Smith. It was unclear if Thurman's story was completely accurate, given that it was complicated to see whether Smith's group fired first or not. For the sake of Smith's safety, they decided to hold him in the town jail with the promise of a fair trial. Smith was not too confident in this idea, and he claimed that he had a bad feeling of some violence that night. Mayor Hodge worked hard to reassure Smith that he would be safe in the town jail. However, there are speculations today that could lead one to believe that Mayor Hodge was setting Smith up for events that are to come. Smith was accompanied by some freedmen in the jail that night. Around 9 o'clock, the jail yard was ambushed. At the corner of Line Street and Lafayette Street, which is what is currently pictured, two guards were forced at gunpoint and had to silently surrender. Jefferson's mayor at the time was Mayor W.N. Hodge. Hodge was sitting on a wagon inside of the jail yard, being a part of the guard protecting Smith. Mayor Hodge stated that the large party of men that rushed into the jail yard were armed with six-shooters and double-barrel shotguns. They were also disguised differently. Within seconds, the yard was full of these men. They all yelled, "Down your arms, or we will kill the last one of you." Every attempt made to take back control of the jail was shut down because the guards protecting the jail were overpowered by numbers. The angry mob threatened members of the citizen guard with violence to surrender the keys. The mob was determined to kill Smith. It was apparent that they had no intentions of killing any of the guard. As the mob approached the jail cell, Gray was one of the first ones to enter Smith's cell. Smith fought incredibly hard to defend himself. He actually fought so hard that Gray had to be helped out of Smith's cell due to him being severely injured. The mob then had no more interest in wasting time. They then proceeded the attempt to murder Smith and shot Smith 18 times. The four freedmen that accompanied Smith were Cornelius Turner, Lewis Grant, Richard Stewart, and Anderson Wright. Turner managed to escape when the mob initially entered the jail yard, but Grant, Stewart, and Wright were captured and brought to a place on the edge of town known as Sulphur Spring. The mob began to shoot the freedmen. Grant was shot twice in the back of the head and twice to his side. Stewart was shot twice in his left side, once in his right leg, and 13 times to the left side of his face. The shooter then placed a revolver against the side of Wright's head, and right before his life was taken, Wright asked the shooter to allow him to pray for both himself and the killer. The killer allowed him to pray, with the threat of making it quick or else he will be in hell in 10 minutes and with Smith following right behind him. As Wright knelt down, the shooter knocked his hat off and fired at him, which struck him in the shoulder. Wright was then somehow able to flee and made it to the bushes for safe hiding. 2 of Smith's political allies were also targeted by the attackers. These allies were Judge Colbert Caldwell and Judge Donald Campbell. Campbell was hidden in Curtis headquarters with the fear that an event like this would happen. Fortunately, he was safe there. Caldwell wasn't so lucky. Caldwell was in bed at home when he heard the shots ring out. He then quickly jumped out of bed, grabbed his 2 sons, and ran out to the bushes near his house. Within a few moments, the mob walked by the bushes, being only a few feet in front of Caldwell. Once they passed by, Caldwell sent his youngest son, Nat, back to the house to inform his wife and daughters that he fled for safety. As Nat approached the house, the mob seized him and grilled the young boy about his father's whereabouts. Nat did not release any information about his father's location to the mob and was released. So thanks to his son, Caldwell was able to escape. The next morning, Major Curtis sent an emergency telegram to the government explaining the events of the night before, asking for reinforcements, stating that less than 500 men would be of no service, meaning that they would need a great number of military help to contain the violence. For the next year, Jefferson was involved with military arrest, fleeing citizens, and a complex military trial. This chain of events is part of a big untold story about the history of Jefferson, Texas. But all of these things are so significant to the Reconstruction period in the small town that still stands today. We hope this video helped establish your interest in the history of Jefferson. Thank you, and goodbye.